All right, well, let's actually do this slideshow. Okay. All right. So let me know if anything is not showing up because apparently technology is not my friend today, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And this is just me. I just want to let you guys know why I'm doing this presentation today. I have been a trainer since 2008 and training service dogs for a little over a decade now. Those are my certifications. And then I just want to kind of go into a few definitions first. So this part is a little drier, but it is really important. So what is a service dog? Basically, according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's defined as a dog who is trained in specific tasks that mitigate a disability for one person, right? And then it's a dog that's trained to behave in public as well. And legally, they are actually technically considered medical equipment. There is not a legal certification for service dogs. They are basically everything's based on their behavior. So there's a lot of people out there. If you go to, different websites and things, if you search for service dog certifications, there are definitely a lot of groups that will say, okay, well, we'll sell you the certification or send us this information and we'll certify your dog. And that is not accurate in the US. We don't have any kind of requirement like that. So
Hey,
all the
Sarah,
dogs' legitimacy, yeah.
I think we may have lost your presentation.
Oh my God. Okay, hold on.
We still
Just
hear
a
you,
second.
but we,
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. This is like nightmare technology today. This has never happened before.
yeah. So for those who are new to us, Sarah has done like 3 different webinars before. Just today, nothing is cooperating, apparently.
Nothing is cooperating at all.
Okay.
Okay, let me reshare the
Gross.
screen. Share screen. All right, let's try this again. Are we seeing it?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, perfect. All right, so like I was saying, no legal certification. It's just something that people think is needed. It actually is not in the US. It's just based on behavior. So people get these 3 types of dogs mixed up a lot. I hear the names getting confused constantly. People think that some of them have access that don't. So service dogs are the ones we're talking about today. They help one person. They do need training. They do have access to public places, which legally means places the public is allowed. There are a few exceptions. One is churches. Churches have the ability to say they are not allowed. That's their choice. Another would be like sterile spaces. They may not be allowed in those spaces, but in general, anywhere the public is usually allowed, a service dog can go. They do have to be dogs. There used to be a caveat to that they could be miniature horses, but that's not really a thing anymore. But miniature horses were also used for a while, especially as guide animals. So the difference with emotional support and therapy, emotional support dogs help one person also, but they don't need training because they don't go in public. So a lot of people think that emotional support dogs can also go into stores with them, and that is not legally true. They do have extra rights under the Fair Housing Act, so they do get housing privileges, and it does not have to be a dog. Emotional support animals can be many different types of animals. Therapy animals also can be many different types of animals, and they do require training usually because they're the dogs that go into like hospitals, nursing homes, different situations like that. So they are important, and really all of these are important dogs or important working dogs. But the service dogs are the ones that get the full public access with their person. And this is just a definition of disability from the Americans with Disabilities Act website. So the general idea behind it is that there is a physical or mental impairment that limits major life activities, or a record of that impairment or a perception of that impairment. I put the actual text here so you guys can see that. If you go to the American with Disabilities Act website, and I think I have it linked at the very end, they have a really good FAQ section with tons of service dog information. So I do recommend that website if you need more information about the law side of it. And then this is the last little like legal thing of this part, public access. Most businesses have no idea what they can and can't allow with service dogs. The majority of the places that I go either give too much access or too little. So a lot of places do understand, and it is becoming more widespread, but they can actually only ask 2 questions if someone comes to their door with a dog. And the first one is the dog a service dog required because of a disability? And the second one is, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? They cannot make you show them the task, they can't ask about your disability, and they cannot request documents proving the dog is a service dog. You also do not have to have any kind of vest or identifying information, although most people like to have that because it makes your life easier to have a vest or a collar or something that says service dog on it. Legally, that's not required. And these are the main things that I train for public access: healing, settling, and distractions. So healing, just walking right next to your side. They need to be right with you. They need to be focused on you. Service dogs, you kind of want to be invisible, basically. You want them to kind of be there and people to be surprised when they move with you. Like, oh, there's a dog here and I didn't know it. That's my favorite thing that happens to me. I'm like in like a restaurant with a dog. Is that I stand up to leave and the table next to us, someone's like, I didn't even know there was a dog there. That's what a service dog is supposed to look like, right? So healing's walking right next to you. Settling is like in a restaurant or a store, being still, being calm, waiting under the table, for example. And then with distractions, what we're looking for basically is ignoring distractions. We want the dog to be able to focus on their person and not get distracted by everything else that's happening. So that is the main 3 things that we're looking for with public access. Okay, so I'm gonna play a little video. And this is some examples of public access behaviors. This beautiful dog here is Fenrir. She's amazing. And she's at the aquarium here, and she and the dolphins had a really good time. But I'm just going to show you guys some examples of some public access behaviors. There's a few short examples for each one. Should have a video playing.
Close.
This is Fenrir again.
Yes, very good. Touch. Heel. Very good, Fenrir. Very good.
She's staying right next to my foot. She's focused on me. That's what we're looking for.
Good deal. Heel. Girl.
So that loose leash, the dog checking in with me, those are important things. Usually I'll have them sit when we stop or at least stand still.
Heel.
And you'll see me cue close a few times here. That just means stand next to my side or come next to my side. So this is settling at a restaurant. That's the same dog you saw a second ago. That's Ripley. Settling with kids running around nearby in a store. And at a coffee shop. Good job, Bill. This is a great distraction. Toy stores are a lot of fun. This is a food drop. They have to ignore food that drops on the floor. Yes! And of course, the airport is one of the most distracting places that we train. Okay. So one thing I will mention about all of these is that these videos that I have are all dogs that are in training. I don't really have a lot of video of dogs doing tasks in real life because usually when those happen, the person's not in a state to video it, for one thing. So when I'm with them, we're usually doing training exercises. And so the videos you're going to see are active training. A lot of these dogs, most of them I would say, are pretty far along in the training in these videos, maybe almost done or done. But it is definitely a training process. So you're going to see me in those videos rewarding pretty frequently with treats, and they may not be perfect, right? But they're doing pretty good, or else I wouldn't use them as an example. So this is, again, the definition of a task. It's a trained behavior that mitigates a disability. So that just means it has to be something the dog has been trained to do that physically helps the person. It is what separates a service dog from an emotional support dog. Emotional support is not legally considered a task, but there are a lot of tasks that provide emotional support, and for many people, just having the dog with them provides emotional support. So they can certainly also provide emotional support. It just can't be their specific trained task without a behavior that goes with it. And this is just examples. There's tons of tasks. I wrote down all the ones I could think of first, things that I have trained frequently. So just a few quick examples. You guys can certainly, look at or screenshot this list. But medical alerts are really common. Diabetic alert dogs, seizure alert dogs are some of the more common ones that are known. Hearing dogs, for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, that is definitely something that can be really helpful. I've trained a lot of hearing dogs, and they will do things like alert you to a person calling you from behind, or a doorbell, or an alarm going off, like a smoke alarm, for example. Psychiatric alerts would be things like alerting to an oncoming panic attack, or interrupting compulsive or self-harm behaviors, waking up from nightmares. And then a go and get help behavior is a pretty common one as well. That's really great for a lot of people. So I separated these into 3 categories because it's kind of how I train them. So the second category is retrieves, tugs, and pushes. The retrieve would be bringing something to you. Tug would be pulling on something, and push would be pushing something, usually with their nose or a paw. So the retrieve is usually picking up dropped objects and giving it to the handler, but it can also be bringing you something like a medicine bag or a bottle of water, or a phone in an emergency. Opening and closing doors and drawers, turning on light switches, emergency buttons, and my personal favorite is teaching them to help load and unload your laundry. I love teaching that one. It's so fun. Unfortunately, I don't have a good video of that one. I need to get a good video. Physical support tasks can include guiding, and guide dogs are kind of the original service dogs. They've been around the longest. So most private trainers are not training guide dogs. They're usually through organizations that have been around for a long time. Guide dogs generally are the most training, and they have to have the most specific temperament because they are basically have the person's life fully in their hands. They're leading them, around obstacles. They have to learn intelligent disobedience, which means that if their person's trying to make them move forward and there's a car coming, they have to say, no, we're not going to move forward. So there's a lot involved in being a guide dog, and most dogs cannot do it. So it's really, really a more complicated one that most private trainers don't do because it's so hard to find the right dogs for it. And most of the organizations breed their own dogs through generations. Deep pressure on lap is a great one for a lot of people, especially with anxiety. Positioning to create space. A chin rest is also a pressure cue. Balancing, wheelchair pulling, helping them stand up from a fall. These are all pretty common physical support tasks. So we have a task video now. So this is going to be some examples. This is not even a little bit all the tasks that I train, but I wanted to give some examples, and especially the alerts and retrieves. Those are really, really common ones that I train a lot. So you'll see some different examples, different types of dogs, and different types of behaviors. Starting with alerts first. And a lot of my medical alert dogs are smaller.
Yes, good girl.
Wookie, alert. Good boy, alert.
Send her again.
Yeah.
Until I like her.
Oh, very good. Alert. Yes.
And I love this dog. I love all the dogs. Okay, so this is a retrieve. She's holding the leash and giving it to her. That's actually a hold where she has to keep it in her mouth. And same dog, this is Ruka. She's going to go and get a bottle of water out of the pantry.
Good.
Get the water. Good girl.
All right. Okay, Mabel is going to get her mom's bag and bring it to her for medication.
Yes.
And Mabel is very early in training still. And then deep pressure, I just have Ripley laying on my lap here. I taught him how to position, where to position, and this is doing it in public. Okay, this is Ruka blocking to create some space and keep her mom from running into that corner.
Good girl.
Circle.
And this is a circle behavior that Ripley is still kind of learning here.
Yes, good boy.
To also create space.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's some interruptions, interrupting behaviors. So he's interrupting her scratching. And this is Ripley working on interrupting anxiety of gripping arms.
Yes, good boy.
And trying to push my arms apart.
Yes, good boy. Yes, good boy.
So again, a lot of these behaviors, we customize these to the people that are learning them, that need the behaviors. And so each of these dogs I have worked with, and, I generally teach a lot of the task behavior section. Some of my students are really self-motivated and really work a lot on them themselves as well. That's always helpful. It really just depends on their budget and how much they can have me help versus them doing it, what their motivation is. There's a lot of factors, but task behaviors are really fun to train, and they're so incredibly helpful once they're trained for people. Okay, so here's our variety of dogs. This is a lot of different types of dogs, and these are all service dogs. So you can see there's a mix of sizes from just a few pounds up into very large dogs. I have worked with a ton of different types of dogs. I worked with an organization for almost 5 years that used primarily shelter dogs. They also used career change guide dogs, and we'll talk about career change dogs in a minute. Dogs that weren't quite ready to be a guide dog, but still could be a service dog in general. These dogs do a variety of different things. Some of them are mobility dogs. Some of them are psychiatric service dogs. Some of them are medical alert dogs. So there's a number of different things happening in here. And the breed doesn't matter. Like I said earlier, they can be any breed. The behavior is what matters. So their temperament, their behavior, that's what matters when you're choosing a service dog. So we're going to talk about how we do that as well. So when you're getting a dog, if you do not have a dog yet, there are a few options of where you can get a dog. One is an organization. If you're looking for an organization, I really suggest going to the Assistance Dogs International website first. They certify groups around the world, and they have a pretty intensive certification process. And for international travel, it's really, really helpful to have their test, because some places do require it. Like in the US, again, we don't require anything specific. Other countries have different laws. So, it is, if you're going to want to travel internationally, an Assistance Dogs International dog is a good idea. They can be nonprofits and for-profits. There are a lot of nonprofits, and they can vary extremely widely in cost. Usually with an organization, the dog is chosen and trained for you. So they usually already have the dog, they've trained it, they match the dog to you, and then they customize anything that needs to be customized. The downside to this is that the application process and the wait list can be really, really long. Some people will wait a few years to get their dog. But with private training, you're still taking a year or two to train. So it's complicated either way. It's going to take some time. Frequently, organizations have very specific things that they do. So they may only train mobility dogs, or they may only provide dogs to veterans, or they may only do dogs in the Southwest. So, there are some specific things you have to look into for that. And there are lots of organizations that are not Assistance Dogs International organizations that are still fantastic. So I don't want you to think that's the only place to go to look for organizations. It's just that it's a good place to start. And there are a lot of really great organizations there. Okay, so this one is trickier. Private purchase is probably the most expensive option. Generally, it's a breeder or trainer or someone who has bred the dog, who has been training the dog, and they are selling them to you at various levels of training. They're usually bred for the job, but this is an area where I see people get scammed a lot. And I know people that have been scammed out of tens of thousands of dollars by people claiming to give them a legitimate service dog. So you do want to be careful of this and really do your research. And again, very expensive. We'll talk about that in a second. Owner training is what most of my clients are doing. So even though I am helping them and they have a private trainer with them, typically it's called owner training because it's not an organization. Usually training a service dog takes 1 to 2 years. That's average. Some dogs are longer and some dogs very, very rarely are shorter. Sometimes a more mature dog who already has some basic training can go through in several months, but it is not common for it to be less than a year. And very few dogs actually are a good fit to be service dogs. And it can be really, really hard if you have your own dog and you decide to put him through training and you get like 6 months into training and then you're like, my dog is just really uncomfortable in public, or they're really scared, you know, or they have an injury, for example. That's a lot of time and work and money that you've put into this. And you, of course, love your dog and have them already. So it can be really challenging and devastating if it doesn't work. It's often the most cost-effective option, but it does require a lot of work on your part and a lot of self-motivation, and it does take a long time still. And here are the qualities we're looking for in a service dog. I think we had some people that are from rescues, and you know, this is what I tell rescues when I am talking to them about looking for a dog, because when I search for a dog, I look everywhere that I possibly can for dogs. We want the dog to be confident. That's very important. We want them to be healthy. And that doesn't mean they can't have any health problem. It's health problems that are going to deter them from doing the job they need to do, or that are going to cause them pain or discomfort doing the job. I don't want to have a dog on slick floors that has hip dysplasia, you know, so we have to be really aware of those things and pay attention. Friendly, but able to ignore. So if they see a person or dog, we don't want them to be aggressive at all. We don't want them to be afraid. But if they're super distracted by wanting to say hi to the person, which I've actually had several dogs recently I've been training who had this problem, it becomes a huge distraction for them. And it's a lot harder for them to work successfully if they really, 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 really want to say hi. So we have to work on that a lot usually. We want them to be engaged and want to train. That sort of can be taught, but it's a lot easier if you start there. No reactivity. And handler focus just means that they can focus in on their person versus everything else. And that can also be taught, but again, it helps if we have some foundation of that first. We do not want them to be fearful. My big thing with service dogs, I want them to be happy and comfortable. They should have quality of life, right? I don't want them going in public if they're uncomfortable or unhappy. So we definitely want them to be able to go out and do everything that they can do without discomfort, and that includes mental discomfort. So I do not want a dog who is afraid to be a service dog. Health issues, obviously, like I said before, we don't want pain to happen or discomfort. Aggression is really the biggest dequalifying factor. If they are a risk at all to bite people or other dogs or anything to happen, they should not be going out as a service dog. It really is against what is supposed to be happening, and it can be dangerous. Too distracted, if they just really can never focus on you, it makes it very hard to get them to that point. Again, reactive, fixated, like on squirrels, for example, afraid of humans. You know, we have to kind of find those dogs that are not falling into some of these really common behavior issue categories. And sometimes these are things that we can work on. If there's like a minor reactivity, like they bark occasionally because they're excited about a dog, usually I can work through that with them. But if they are, you know, like going and trying to actually like run up and bite someone, that's very, very different. And, you know, probably is going to mean they're not a good fit in most cases. And then the last one is just more interested in things than the person. So if you're out in like the park and they just never look at you and they're only looking at like everything else happening, they're not really doing their job. So again, some level of you can train that and some level of you can't. This is just an example of my training process, but it's pretty similar to what most places will do. And the first step is finding the right dog. So I do an initial like consultation with the person and an evaluation of their dog if they're using their dog. If they don't have a dog, then I help them find a dog. Then we do basic training and foundations. And usually for public access, those foundations are things like going into dog-friendly stores. And I like to use places like Michael's and Barnes & Noble that are dog-friendly, but you're not usually seeing a ton of dogs there because places like a PetSmart, there's a lot of distractions. The other dogs are not going to be behaving like service dogs. It's very challenging. So definitely in early training, I tend to try to find places that are dog friendly, but not dog stores. And then beginning task training. So starting, teaching them the little steps. Training task behaviors is pretty much shaping little steps. So we'll do a small step towards it and then a small step towards it and keep rewarding until we have the full behavior. And it can take a long time to get really complicated behaviors. And then we do advanced public access and task training, and that's really doing them in like a variety of places, lots of different types of distractions, really making sure it's super solid. And then I try to do a public access test. Again, there's not a legal one for the US, but I tend to try to base mine on the Assistance Dogs International test. And that's usually where most of my dogs, we kind of end the consistent training. And we're just doing checkups and like tune-ups, right? Because dogs are always in training their whole lives. We're never really done, but at that point they should be able to successfully go out on their own with the dog and have the dog working for them. So here are some numbers. I did a little research because it's been a while since I checked statistics on this. And the estimates that I found said that there's about 500,000 service dogs in the US currently, which is a lot. That's a lot of service dogs. So that is, that's a pretty interesting number. Costs. So again, I did a little research because I haven't checked the cost of a private service dog in a while. And I do know there's organizations where you can get a dog for nothing except the cost of taking care of the dog. I did find a place that had privately trained service dogs for starting at $46,000. So obviously the range of costs can be vast. That $46,000 I would say is pretty far at the high end, but they're definitely thousands of dollars is not unheard of for sure. That's pretty likely. And then I included this whole quote because I think it's just nice. So you guys can read it if you want, but the main part of it is the majority of dogs in organizations, this is talking about like professional organizations who like breed their own dogs. 50% is a pretty common statistic on how many dogs do not complete training. So it's a really high failure rate, right? So, I've heard it compared to like a dog who can become a service dog is like, it's like getting into an Ivy League school, right? Not everybody's going to do it. And it doesn't mean that if you don't get in, there's anything wrong with you, right? It just means that that specific thing is not the right fit for you. And it's the same thing with service dogs. There just are a lot of dogs who it is not a good fit for. And this statistic is about dogs who are like bred to be service dogs usually. So like I said, guide dogs do have a higher rate because they have to be so strong. A lot of guide dogs who don't make it as guide dogs. I know that I used to work with an organization out in Dripping Springs, Service Dogs Inc., and some of their dogs came from Guide Dogs for the Blind. And they were dogs that did not make it as guide dogs, but were still really excellent dogs and really could still do other service dog jobs. But the majority of dogs that get released from training, usually we call them career change dogs because they're changing from a service dog to something else. Sometimes they'll get moved to another kind of working dog. Most of the time they get adopted out as pet dogs. And one of my current dog is a failed service dog. Tell her she's a service dog dropout. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. She's an incredible dog. She just wasn't the right fit to be a service dog. It wasn't comfortable for her. The challenges of having a service dog, you are going to get a lot more attention in public if you have a service dog with you. And for some people, that is very uncomfortable. Most of the time, it's things like people staring or asking you about your dog or telling you how great your dog is. And some of those things are fine. And some of them can be really frustrating or annoying or uncomfortable. I've definitely had rude comments directed at me before. I've had people walk up many times and just shove their hand towards the dog. So the dogs do need to have a lot of training for all of that to make sure that they are able to handle those kinds of situations. One of the things that I will do if people just reach out to pet the dog without asking is I'll reach out in my hand and grab their hand and just shake it and say hello. Which is something that I learned from another service dog trainer, and I just love it because it really startles the person who's being rude. So regular care needs and costs of a dog, most people understand this part of it, but I will say when you're getting a dog and you have a disability, if you're the primary carer for the dog, if you're having a bad day, your dog still has to eat and potty and exercise, right? So you need to have ways to do those things, even if you are having a bad day. And sometimes that's extra support of other people. And sometimes it's that you figure out situations where you can manage it. And then, like I said, the high career change rates are also very challenging for a lot of people and professional organizations. It's a very emotional and difficult thing. Okay, so I'm gonna go into questions in just a second. I wanted to put this resources page up for a minute, and you guys are welcome to, screenshot it or write down anything. But these are really good resources for finding out more. I mentioned the ADA website. They have great information about all the legal stuff, and they have a lot of FAQs that are really, really helpful. Assistance Dogs International, tons of good stuff there. You can search for organizations by area and type of dog. And then this is another one, International Association of Assistance Dogs Partners. They have a lot of good information as well. I am going to be doing an online course, which hopefully technologically will go way better than the beginning of this one, but we are starting at the end of June. And I'm taking like 5 live students who will be getting feedback from me from videos they send me between, and able to ask lots of questions and have some extra, insight. And then I have lots of auditing spots if you just want to come and watch. But we're going to meet weekly for 8 weeks and go through in much, much more depth what's happening with all of this. And so there is a QR code there if you want to scan that too, and a link at the very bottom. And then last slide, this is just my contact information. I am happy to answer questions. You can go to my website. There's my email, my Think IFIC site, which is online self-guided courses. I'm working on a service dog right now. I have an aggression one up already. So yeah, that's how you can reach me. And I think that I went fast enough that we have time for questions.
We do. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I think you covered some of the things that folks were asking about in the beginning, and I'll give folks a couple minutes to put some questions in there. I know somebody asked, and I'm curious about this too, for dogs that do things like detect migraines. How?
Yeah. So there are really cool things that dogs can do, and we don't even know all of them. Like seizure alert dogs are still kind of a mystery in some ways. They kind of have to have a knack for it to do well. Most seizure dogs are trained as seizure response dogs, and then some of them learn to alert. Migraines are another one, and I'm working with someone right now with migraines, and we're going to do some scent collection and train it based on scent. Some dogs do have a knack for it, and that makes it way, way easier. With scent, generally, we're taking scent of either saliva or sweat, depending on what we're training for. You have to get like a lot of samples, like when your blood sugar is low or when a migraine's coming on, and it's hard to do that when you're not feeling good. So it's a tricky process. But when you get samples, we start to pair that with what we want the dog to do. So the alert, right? So if we're teaching them to alert, we want to have a reason for them to alert as well. And so that kind of gives us a pairing to happen. The order of it is we teach the alert first, separately of all the other things. And then we start to pair it with the thing that we want it to happen with. So if I am doing, for example, a migraine alert, and we're training the scent would happen, and then the dog would alert. And so the cue becomes the scent, right? So it's complicated. It's really hard. When I'm training hearing dogs, the cue is the sound. It's not, the person's not telling them to do anything. They're telling the person something's happening. And so they have to learn to take their cue from the environment or from a smell that's coming off of the person. So it's really hard. But there, it's very possible, and it's really cool, all the things they can do.
One question that someone sort of mentioned before, we've had a few folks in here who are interested in training their own service dogs. They're not sure kind of where to start. Any recommendations?
So depending on your situation, if you already have a dog, the first step is kind of assessing the dog and figuring out if it's going to be a good fit. And, it's hard to do if you don't know what you're looking for. I gave like an overview of some qualities, but it can definitely, be different right? To do it for your own dog especially. So I usually recommend having someone else evaluate your dog if possible. Having someone who knows, a trainer who knows what they're doing, can be really helpful. Assessing dogs is hard. Even professional trainers who've worked with service dogs for a long time, like me, I have assessed dogs before and saw no issues, and then issues showed up later. And what usually happens, if you're assessing a puppy or you're assessing a dog who's like in a shelter, for example, a dog who's in a shelter and goes into a home, behaviors can change over those first few months. You might not see the same behavior in a home as you saw in a shelter. So it's really hard to evaluate in a shelter. Puppies, again, behaviors change while they're growing. So at certain ages, they're easier to evaluate. But it's not as consistent as like an adult dog who already has a pretty clearly established temperament. And there's genetic factors and environment factors. So it's really hard. If you don't have a dog, I definitely recommend doing a lot of research into where to get one. There are a lot of breeders that breed specifically for service dogs. You can also hire someone like me to help you find a dog. I do like a matchmaking thing with some of my clients where I help them find dogs. A couple of, like, well, Ripley, the Australian Labradoodle, and they're the golden one. He's one that I did a lot of searching for, found someone who had him, and he's really amazing. So yeah, that's definitely possible. Once you have the dog, it's starting the training. And in most cases, if you don't have much training experience, I at least recommend doing some classes. Ideally, setting up some lessons with a private trainer is really helpful. And I know that can be cost prohibitive for a lot of people, which is why I'm trying to do things like the online class. But even an occasional lesson with someone is really going to help you guide you in the right direction.
Got a great question about whether a dog could be taught when you're tensing up or grinding your teeth, a symptom of fibromyalgia, and also things like high anxiety. Can they alert for either of those?
Definitely, yes. I do a lot of anxiety alerts. And the hard part is figuring out, like, what do you physically do, right? Most people don't really know the things they physically do when they get anxious. So we have to kind of break it down, and they have to think about it and notice. A lot of my students do finger movements when they're anxious, like they'll start tapping their fingers or like rubbing their arms, clenching their fists. So we turn that into the cue a lot of times. But dogs are really perceptive of body language. So they can learn pretty small cues. It's just harder if it's not an obvious cue. But really all the alert stuff is kind of complicated anyway. But that's part of why you really want a dog who pays attention to you, who really is focused on you a lot, because if they're paying attention to you anyway, you're a lot more likely to be able to get them to respond to really small body changes.
Yep. Another question, is there a breed that's better for being a service dog?
So there's what people kind of call like the big three, which is Labs, Golden Retrievers, and Standard Poodles. Typically, it used to be German Shepherds. Were pretty common. They're way less common now. Just, over time, like breeding has changed temperaments and health and stuff, but there are still places that use German Shepherds. You can have any dog as a service dog. I do find that a lot of the dogs who do the best are the dogs that are kind of bred to be really focused on a person and really friendly. But again, we don't want them to be so friendly that they're distracted, and that's what sometimes happens with like Labs and Goldens. I do see that sometimes, but they do tend to be generally pretty happy-go-lucky, pretty confident, and that really helps a lot. And a lot of the places that are breeding their dogs are breeding Labs and Golden Retrievers. That's really the most common.
Well, and I think you brought this up before, in that what they're task trained to do, the breed might impact a lot. I had a client who was looking for a mobility assistance dog, and she got what she thought was going to be a large doodle, but it was actually a mini doodle. And that was not as helpful. So thinking about the breed tendencies for the specific task that you need. I think one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I get this question sometimes where folks have dogs who might be able to perform a service to their handler at home, but might not be great for public access. Any thoughts on kind of where that distinction is?
Yeah, so there is, generally I hear them called skilled companions, which are dogs that are trained just to do tasks at home, basically. If they're not really appropriate to go in public, but they can help you at home, I mean, that's still pretty amazing. Most of us are at home a lot of the time, so many of the issues people need help with are at home. So there's definitely a place for those dogs for sure. And I did want to follow up on what you said about size and stuff too, because there is, like, you in my videos, you see a huge variety of size. The small dogs are almost all alert dogs, right? I don't have any small dogs that are doing really anything other than medical alerts. They can do some tasks like pressure, but they can't give a lot of pressure to you. So it's different. So mostly they're doing alerts. The larger dogs are generally the ones that are doing mobility and guide dogs and things like that.
So we get the question a lot about how people can get their service dogs certified. Any words of wisdom to folks who are wondering about certification and what that might mean or not mean? I know you touched on this a little bit before.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of scams. So don't give anyone money to certify your dog. It's not legitimate. You know, obviously paying for training, paying for help with your dog, that's different. But a certification is not a thing that actually exists in the US. And there can be different laws state to state, but no state laws can give you less access than the federal law can. So there is no certification required anywhere in the US. And that is a really, really common misconception. And even people that I have worked with who I'm like, they start training with me and I've told them like so many times, like, we don't need a certification. They still sometimes ask about it because people say it so much. People say, is your dog a certified service dog? And they expect that. And yeah, no, usually it is, I mean, pretty much always, you know, someone's asking you to pay them to certify your dog. That's usually a scam. It's usually someone trying to get your money. So you do not need to do anything like that.
Yep. I'm thinking about some common questions that we get. I sometimes hear people with concerns about fake service dogs. Any thoughts on sort of that aspect of things?
Yeah, it's a problem. I can pretty much tell you when I go out in public which dogs are legitimate service dogs pretty quickly, because usually the ones that are legitimate service dogs are with their person. They're paying attention. They're not being disruptive. And then sometimes I'll see dogs that are like wandering around the end of their leash or just not listening at all. The person's not really paying attention to what they're doing. That doesn't necessarily mean they've never done training or that the dog is not actually helping them, but that's not really what they're supposed to be doing. You know, the problem with fake service dogs is that even if the dog is well behaved, any dog that is not a legitimate service dog going out in public who's had all the training makes it harder for people who do need service dogs to go out in public with their dogs. And I have had a few incidents with students where they were denied access into places and shouldn't have been. And it was really upsetting for them and really traumatic. And their dog was not doing anything wrong. They were not doing anything wrong. Someone at the business had maybe a bad experience with a dog before that was not a legitimate service dog and just decided that they're not letting any dogs in or think that they, again, need certification or something. So fake service dogs are definitely harmful. I also have seen situations where a trained service dog was attacked by a fake service dog. And that can, I mean, mess up years of training, thousands of dollars worth of training. It can sometimes wash a service dog out where they can't be a service dog anymore if they have a behavior reaction to that, if they're badly hurt. So yeah, having dogs in public only who are legitimate service dogs is important, but it's complicated because we don't want to make access any harder for people, which is why there isn't really like a national certification or test yet, because we want everyone that needs a service dog to be able to have a service dog. So there's probably something that's going to happen at some point in the near future. But as for right now, there are a lot of laws against fake service dogs. If you are found to have a dog who is not a service dog and you're passing them as a service dog, depending on where you are, you can get like a really big fine, a misdemeanor, you definitely can get charged for it. So, you don't want to do it. You only want to take the dog out if it's legitimate. If you see a dog that is disruptive or acting inappropriately or aggressively, I don't get involved, but I will sometimes mention to an employee, hey, if a dog is doing this, you can ask them to leave. They're not supposed to do that. I really never have to do that, but that I think is more appropriate than confronting the person usually.
Yeah. And I think the other component that you mentioned briefly too is that there are service dogs out there that may not look like what you are expecting, right? There are some
Yeah,
folks where the dog may not be disruptive, but they may not have a great heel.
yeah,
They may not have a great settle, but they're still performing an important task.
yeah,
And that task may not be
absolutely.
obvious. So we might see someone
Yeah,
who's in a wheelchair or someone who's using a cane and their dog looks obviously like a service dog, but just because you see that
yeah,
cute little Pomeranian does not mean it's not a real service dog. So we want to be really
yeah.
cautious before deciding that someone's service dog is not real.
And there's a lot of invisible disabilities that people use service dogs for. So, I honestly, I would say most of my clients that have service dogs do not look disabled, whatever that means. But people don't know. And so they do get questioned a lot more because they don't have a very visible, obvious disability.
Yep. Okay, so one question that I have for you, because I was not aware of this until
Yeah.
recently. So airlines are not covered directly by the Americans with Disabilities Act. They run on a separate set of rules. So tell me about bringing a service dog on an airplane.
Yes. So that got changed recently because of all the issues that we're having, because they used to allow emotional support dogs as well. But because there is no requirement for their temperament or training, there were incidents happening like bites and things to staff and other passengers. So they really limited that pretty strictly. Service dogs now do have to be full service dogs. There are some airlines that allow service dogs in training. That varies. But some of them don't even allow dogs in training. They only allow dogs that have completed training. And they can ask you to leave if the dog is disruptive, if the dog acts aggressively, they can ask you to leave. There is a form you fill out typically if you're going to travel by air with a dog, and it does ask for the name and contact of your trainer. I have only been contacted a couple times. They don't do it for everybody, but I do sometimes get calls from them. And it's just basically them saying, hey, did you train this dog? So because of that, you have to be really careful as a trainer, obviously. So I'm very careful to only do that with dogs that I've worked with for a long time, people that I trust. But yeah, definitely, there's a lot more checking. It is a different law. And emotional support dogs are covered under the Fair Housing Act. So that's not ADA either. But yeah, the airline law is definitely different. The air travel has different regulations, and international air travel is even more complicated. But if your dog is trained and a service dog, they can go on a plane with you. You just have to, fill out the correct form and, make sure your dog is ready for it, which is hard because you can't really practice on a plane.
Yep, absolutely. Awesome.
Yeah.
I know that was a lot of questions and a lot of things that you covered in today's talk. I will be sending this out hopefully tomorrow. And keep in mind, again, if you're interested in doing service dog training, Sarah has that upcoming course. Doing group service dog training can be a great way to handle,
Yeah.
the costs of different components there and still get some expert advice. So don't be afraid. You can do the thing. You will figure it out. I'll send this out and then we will go from there. Our next webinar is next week, and that is Max Sandy talking about reactivity for Spanish speakers. And then we've got lots of other fun webinars coming up this summer. So stay tuned. And also thank you to everyone who donated to make this webinar possible. We really appreciate that. We are a 501c3, so if you like what we're doing, please feel free to make a donation on our website, which is everydogaustin.org. And with that, thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate you. Thanks for making it through the technology issues today.
Thank you for your patience with me at the beginning.
Yep. And we will see you soon. All right. Have a good night, y'all. Bye.